All right. Well, again, we want to welcome everyone. I think folks are logging in online as well. Glad that you've joined us. Sorry about the technical difficulties there for those logging in. And we're pleased to begin it's not really the beginning, but it's the beginning of the recommended and letter part of the budget process. So we'll turn it over to Jeff. Thank you and Mike for your work.
Thank you, Commission. Thank you to everybody for coming in person or tuning in online, and to those who will see this on YouTube later when it's posted. So that's the thank yous. The presentation materials will all be online on the budget's webpage under the Greene County's website, except for the video presentation, which will be on YouTube. Mike, can you click on the presentation? There we go. Okay. So when we look at the recommended budget presentation, the purpose of the presentation of the recommended budget is for the budget office to take the requested budget figures and to come up with a workable budget to present to commission. If everything fell apart, this would be a budget that could be adopted and used as a workable budget for Greene County next year. Now, most of you will look at this and say it's not a workable budget because our requests aren't funded. And that's perfectly understandable because we don't know the details behind your requests like you do. And so we anticipate during the commission budget hearings that there'll be a number of items that they approve that have to be approved just so this county can function properly in 2026. However, when we look at what we have right now in the recommended budget presentation, you'll see we have ourselves starting 2026 with a recommended cash and cash equivalent balance of almost $46 million. We have our estimated revenues, net of the transfers that we anticipate being done out of 101, for a total available funds of $134,505,000. Right now, the recommended expenses add up to $86,307,000. And we've projected some savings from some of those expenditures that are approved up here of about 622. So that gives us an ending cash balance of $48,821,000, or an increase in balance of $2,825,000. So when we were looking at the requested budget presentation, this number was not a positive $2,825,000. It was actually a negative $13,529,000. So you can kind of get an idea of the measures that the budget office has taken since the requested budget presentation to get us to this level. We'll talk about this general revenue fund in more detail later. When we look at Road and Bridge, they have their fund balance increasing by about $416,000. The assessment fund, if you'll recall, at the requested budget presentation, we had a current year change of about over $500,000. We've now recommended lower expenditures to where that is a current year change of about $44,000 being diminished. When we look at that fund, we had mentioned that it's possible that some of the requests were operating requests that were in excess of operating balance or of operating revenues for a current year. When we looked at further analysis, out of that $530,000 that was in requested, we think about $93,000 might be operating expenditures that would be in excess of operating revenues. And so with a little bit of additional discussion with the assessor's office, we can probably figure out how we can come to something that would work, or if there's a possibility that the drawdowns that get approved will be made up by future revenues before the fund balance is depleted. Which you look here, we have a fund balance of cash and cash equivalents of about $7,900,000, and operating expenses between 3.4 and $3.5 million. So total, something that's very manageable. When we look at E911, we have a fund with a very strong cash balance, $13,707,000 out of annual operating expenditures of about $10 million. And actually, it's usually less, but there's a much higher requests and recommendations in this than what has happened in the past. And right now they have a reduction, current year change of about $109,000, which can easily be covered by one-time expenditures. However, there's a number of expenditures that you'll see later that we don't have recommended so that 911 can present those to commission and commission can have an understanding of where increases in this 911 budget is happening. When you look at law enforcement sales tax, currently we're showing an increase in cash of about $16,510. So we're maintaining that $2.3 million cash balance. This is the primary change in this was a reduction in expenditures that caused this net transfer to be $3,425,000 lower. So there are big changes in the recommended from the requested in law enforcement sales tax. When we look at the 31st Judicial Circuit Surcharge Fund, we have us spending down the balance in order to take care of some of the projects that we have going on campus. And that's perfectly acceptable because that's what this fund is for. Federal stimulus, we know that ARPA has to be completed in 2026. And so we show ourselves spending the remaining funds on ARPA, or what we estimate at this time to be the remaining funds on ARPA. When we look at the opioid fund, we show ourselves having expenditures of about, or revenues about $360,000, expenditures about $260,000 to represent commitments that have been made and not fully spent yet, and the possibility of additional commitments that haven't happened yet. So there's room in there. This courthouse administration fund, we've gone a number of years without spending any money out of that. This just gives us the ability to spend that balance if a need should arise. And the last big change that we see here is the bond fund. And we show a current year cash change in the bond fund of $21,632,000. The beginning estimated balance in cash and cash equivalents is $32,567,000. So you can see we're doing a big spend down, and that's basically us calling our NID bonds, Jamestown and Wilson's Creek, at call date and paying them off. So that's over $6 million of expenditures next year to get that bond off of our books. And the remainder of that is us drawing down money on our 2022A bond, which we're currently using for the judicial courts facility upgrades. And then we have our bond payments that we normally make every year. And so that accounts for a net $21,632,000 decrease in cash balance in bonds. So typically every year we end up looking at general revenue because general revenue has to have the cash to support all of the funds. And traditionally, the Law Enforcement Sales Tax Fund, Fund 206, is the fund that needs to have a transfer from general revenue in order for that operation to sustain. So when we look at these two, again, we can see the balance going from 46 million to 48.8, and from 2.3 to just a little bit higher, 2.3. And so right now in the recommended budget presentation, it's a very doable thing. So one of the things that we've started monitoring and doing this year, as you've probably noticed from one of our presentations in the huddle and then our monthly presentations to commission, is we're starting to track our cash timing. And when we did the requested budget presentation, this yellow line here which is the 2026 budget and the estimate of cash use, that line was well below this blue and gray line, which the blue line is the 2025 budget impact on cash, and the 2024 is the actual impact on cash from what we can get from the Eden records at this time. And so before, in November of 2026, on the requested budget, we had a use of cash of $38.8 million. And so you can see right here, we're at almost $31 million with both of these. So 38 million put us way down here in use of cash. And that 38 million use of cash in GR, along with the $7 or $8 million use of cash in LAST, ended up being more than the cash that we had available to support timing differences. So with the 13 million in cuts to general revenue, well, 13 million less in recommended budget versus requested budget, we've gone from that 38.8 million to 24.2 million in use of cash in November, which is our low point in use of cash. And that's pretty important. One thing to mention, though, is this being 24.2 million and then 25 being 30.8 million and 24 being 31.2 million. The budget office has looked at this, and we believe that 2024 and 2025 are affected by about $4 million. So when we look at the 2024 cash impact line, we actually had $4 million in cash expenditures that were made against the actual that weren't reimbursed. And so if you take $4 million off of that total, it's a lot lower. When you look at 2025, this is just taking the budget, not our actual results. And we've actually collected that $4 million this year, and that $4 million collected was not budgeted. So we can see how both of these could be better by about $4 million. And that'll come into play in a few slides. And there we go. So side by side, looking at what we have planned for 2026 in the recommended budget, we have our cash balances, cash and cash equivalent balances in 12/31 of 24, and we've taken those from what Eden is currently showing. And it's not only the posted balances, but the unposted balances. So right now we're showing cash and cash equivalents of being about $46,500,000 in general revenue and $3.7 million in law enforcement sales tax. Now, when we did the requested budget, we did the same thing, and we took the budgeted change in 2025 and subtracted that from the cash balance to see what our 2026 beginning balance would be for using the things. Since the requested budget, the budget office has done estimates of all of our ending balances in 2025. And with 2025, we believe we're seeing $4,344,000 worth of differences to the positive. Now, about $4 million of that, of course, is going to be the ARPA funds that were approved and paid that weren't budgeted. But we have seen other changes. And then there's things that are affected that go the other way. Would like to say that part of this, we actually asked for input for all offices and department heads about what their 2025 ending balances would be during the requested budget presentation. We did receive input from IS and only IS. And that took our $1 million worth of savings estimate, a little bit more than $1 million, and raised it by $334,000. So because of what IS has done, there's about $334,000 more of spendable balance than what budget would have calculated otherwise. And so even though we're well along in this budget process, I would like to encourage everyone else to follow IS's example of knowing their ending balance and projecting their ending balance, because they know it better than we do. We're using formulas based on how things were spent in 2024 compared to the budget in 2025 and how things have been spent through September 30th. And then we're using those formulas to come up with ending balance numbers. So you guys are going to know your balances a lot better than we do. And you're going to be able to give your lines the kind of attention that Mike and I can't give 1,000 lines. So we appreciate what IS has done in this process, and we encourage everybody else to follow suit. Okay. So, yeah, so that $4 million is primarily ARPA. And then one thing you see here is we take that beginning balance for 2026 and we're subtracting out the reserves that we're not allowed to spend money out of for the budget. So we're taking out $3 million, which is about 3% of revenues for the contingency account, or what we're now calling emergency funds. And we have $1 million for the liability reserve. And we anticipate the estimated 27th pay period reserve to be about $2,670,000 at year end. And that gives us the usable cash and equity. So what you might notice is our big reserve, operating reserve, is not being subtracted from this. And that's because the primary purpose of the operating reserve is to cover timing differences. And that's what we're looking at right now is, can we survive and pay for our timing differences? So now, when we look at the actual usable numbers of 39.3 million and 2.1 million, and we take our projected timing differences, you know what we got from the graph. We're showing timing differences as 24.240 for general revenue with the recommended budget, and still a negative 7,573,000 for law enforcement sales tax. So that gives us a net usable position of $15,103,000 in general revenue to cover our dip in November of 2026. And at that same time, we will have to use $5,463,000 of GR balance to cover the timing differences in law enforcement sales tax. So with just the recommended budget at this time, we have a net $9,640,000 of extra cash for timing differences. Again, anything the commission approves beyond the recommended budget will increase the timing differences that you see here and reduce the usable cash for timing differences. We'll have a lower net balance after timing differences are accounted for. So besides looking at timing differences, of course, we need to look at the actual projected use of cash or source of cash from the recommended budget. So we have usable cash and equivalents in general revenue of about $39,300,000 and $2.1 million in law enforcement. We have sources of cash of $2.8 million and $16,000. So our usable funds left for 2027 are anticipated to be $42,169,000 and $2,126,000. And again, when we look at 2024, we're at $31.2 million in max timing and $6,726,000 in law enforcement sales tax. So that's about $37.9 million. When we look at 2025 budgeted maximums, we're at $31.2 million and $7.7 million for about $38.9 million in maximum timing differences. Now, we mentioned that we believe each of those should be lower by about $4 million because of ARPA. So when we combine those totals, we have usable funds for GR and LEST of about $44,300,000. And so when we look at our timing differences, the 2025 max timing difference is $38,991,000, which that gives us just $5,304,000 in cushion to absorb timing differences from what the 2025 budgeted timing difference total was. And that seems like a lot of money, but if we have something slow down in billing and us getting receipts, or we're heavy on our expenditures at the beginning of the year for construction compared to how we were in 2024, we can eat $5 million pretty fast. And so we just have to be careful and watch that and be cognizant of our timing differences. You know, we've been spending down our balances every year since 2018, when the voters gave us the increase in tax. And we haven't had to worry about those balances until now. Now we're actually at a point to where we have to be extremely careful about not only the cash balances where we end, but our ability to cover timing differences throughout the year. So in 2026, you'll see the recommended, so the 24 million that we have right now in GR plus EST amount is 31.8 million. So that 31.8 million, that gives us a cushion for timing differences of about $12,481,000. That's a very comfortable cushion. And that shows the commission has room to be able to make decisions in spending this money from a timing coverage respect. When we look at the balances, we know right now with the recommended budget that we're showing an increase of cash of almost $3 million. However, when we look at what we do in 26 and how that's going to impact us for 2027, we're going to have to realize that we have a big change in bonds in 2027. And so we have to be cognizant of that change that's going to occur and what that impact in 2027 will be compared to our 2026 balances. So in 2026, I mentioned we're paying off Jamestown and Wilson's Creek bond, which is a little over $6 million in payments next year. In order to do that, and we've talked to commission about this, and they agree that it's a very prudent thing for us to pay that off since there's no collateral anymore. And we would just be continuing to throw interest payments after a balance, and our loss on this activity would just increase. It's a very good thing for us to go ahead and pay it off right now. What we've been doing up to this point is we've been transferring every month 1/12 of the next year's worth of payments for bonds. So we always have a large balance in the bond fund for upcoming bond payments. That's to a tune of over $13 million right now. And so what we're doing in 2026 is we're changing that policy where you can use that 13 million plus balance to pay off the Jamestown Wilson's Creek bond. And then we're going to use the rest of it to make payments on our upcoming bonds until we have to start transferring funds again. So we're going to fully deplete the balance that's built up in the bond fund for bond payments. And then we're going to go to just transferring the amount necessary 1 month before for the next bond payment. So that actually gives us a benefit in 2026 in that our bond payments, our transfers for bond payments are actually going to be about $4 million less than what they would have been. So in 2027, we won't have that built up balance anymore. And we're going to have to actually transfer almost $4,200,000 more than what we will be doing in 2026. So keeping at the same activity as we are in 2026, we know with this change, instead of making almost $3 million, impact in 2027, not next year, but the year after, would be a decrease in cash balance of $1,345,000. And we're okay with that. We've done planned spend downs for many years, but it's something that we have to watch because, as you have just found out, we can have between 5 million and 12 million in cash flow coverage. And so we have to watch that cash flow coverage to make sure that as we go forward, we can cover the cash timing differences and not just the ending cash balance. So in this case, if commission ended up spending an additional $3 million, then you can see that in 2027, we'll be starting from a hole of about $4 million. And so that's just something that we have to keep in mind while commission is making their decisions for 2026, is that we do know we'll have an impact on 2027 with what's decided here. Now, the good news is our bond payments decrease every year. So 2027, we know we're going to have an increase in transfers of 4,186,000. After that, that change from 4,028,000 will save $400,000. In 2029, it'll be $822,000 in savings from the 2027 amount. And we finally get to where we've filled in that hole by 2032, when our bond payments are 4,625,000 less than what they are here. So we have to just keep all these issues in mind. Me, for one, though, I'm extremely happy that we're pulling the trigger and we're paying off the NID bonds. So we've talked a lot about cash and where we are. What's in the recommended budget? So right now, the recommended budget includes a mid-year step increase for eligible employees, and then just the recommended balances that budget has put in. What's not currently included is a COLA for employees. So right now, there's no COLA in the recommended budget, and that will be one of the top priorities for commission to look at. A 1% COLA for GR and LEST beginning at the beginning of the year is about $751,000. So if you're wanting to look at maybe a 3% COLA, you can roughly say that's about 2.3 million. And so that a 3% COLA would roughly use up the funds that I would be comfortable with commission spending, but it's commission's decision, and it could be justified to go lower than that. I'm wondering if I missed some notes here. Yeah. Let's go back a couple pages. That would be a couple pages. So we have this 1,345,181 number, and that's just a budget estimate. There's a lot of things that can change between now and the appropriated budget. And some of the things that we're looking at would be departments and offices getting back to us with better estimates on what that ending 2025 balance would be. And then there's some issues in the 2026 budget that we've been rather conservative on, that if we get input during the budget hearings, commission might be willing to increase those revenue amounts. Mainly talking about DOC boarding. DOC boarding, the state boarding, the sheriff's office lowered their estimate by about $600,000, but we lowered it by about $1.2 million based on the activity that we've seen in revenues through 9/30. And we believe the sheriff's the state is actually paying that DOC boarding a little bit slower than what they did in 2024. We just don't know. And there's going to be some changes in how those board bills are claimed. Instead of it going through the sheriff's office to the circuit clerk's office, it's going to be claimed directly by the sheriff's office. And we don't know if we'll see a rough patch in how that process gets processed when that switch happens. So it's possible that there could be easily another $600,000 or even $1 million added to DOC board. But that's something that we need a discussion with the sheriff's office on, and we need commission to look at and decide to make that change. Another thing that's a concern is we have a high level of revenue based on detainees from ICE. And of course, the question that we have is, how long will this level of ICE detainees last? Is it something that's going to be a permanent thing? During the next few years, it's going to stay at this high level? Or is there a point in time where that starts to tail off? Even though we have I don't know the estimate. I was going to throw out a rough number of 27 million that I'd heard before, but I'm not sure. There's a high number of illegal immigrants in the country. Are we going to go after every single one and keep our jail as full as possible? The sheriff on many occasions has stated that he has no control over the volume of it, whether it's state or federal. That he just keeps his house operating in an efficient manner to where they're encouraged to keep it here. So that's one of our questions is, will the level of ICE detainees trail off? We haven't seen that yet when we're monitoring the numbers, but that's always a concern. And so with that, do we continue to fund operating expenses for this increased revenue from ICE detainees? Or should we start treating this revenue from ICE detainees more as something that can justify and take care of one-time expenditures? So that when that spending, when that revenue tails off, either a little or a lot, we don't know, we're not as impacted from a budget standpoint if we've been using it to take care of one-time expenditures every year. And then the other thing on a positive note would be the sheriff's office is currently renegotiating the contract rate for federal inmates. And so we don't know what that's going to end up at, but we anticipate that we'll know it by the end of the year. And with that change in contract rates, there'll be an adjustment to revenues. And so that could also greatly impact this number. One thing that I need to mention is for sales tax. Right now, the budget has sales tax projected flat. So basically no improvement in sales tax from where we expect 2025 to end up at. And that's basically due to an outlook that 2026 more likely than not will be subject to a recession. And so in times of recession, you actually don't have consumer spending growing, you have it decreasing. We don't know that this will happen, but when we look out online and we look at economic resources, they're pointing that it's more than likely that we'll have a recession sometime in 2026. The later it is, the better for us, more likely than not. And so at this point in time, we've put sales tax at a non-growth level. So that's also impacting us in a negative way. And of course, we're talking about the 2025 and getting us balances in 2025, but also in 2026, it'll be a matter of how much savings to budget we actually experience in 2026, and that amount of funds can actually help us for the 2027 balance. So there's still a large number of unknowns at this point in time. But what we're showing right now is that the recommended budget has us in a good place, and there is actually room for commission to make some decisions. So back to where we were. Besides the COLA, then when we look at general revenue and law enforcement sales tax, there's about $13,425,000 of requests that are not funded. And you'll see there's actually about $2 million reduction in that when we look at vacancy being added in. And then law enforcement sales tax, those requests are about $3.4 million that are not being funded currently. So to go into a little bit of a quick detail about some of these things, this shows us the fund. So general revenue fund, Fund 101. And then we have our budgeted categories, personnel, operations, and capital. When you look over here, you'll see we have $7,154,000 in commission decisions related to personnel, $3.2 million related to operations, and $3 million related to capital. And that's how we get to our $13,425,000. We'll actually break down general revenue into offices and departments later on in the presentation. When we look at Road and Bridge has savings of about $26,700 in personnel, and that's all from adjustments that have happened since late July when the personnel items were sent out. And so there's been some employee turnover, and that employee turnover has generated about $27,000 in savings. So we don't anticipate any issues with Road and Bridge there. And then budget actually increased the amount for insurance and the amount for TIFs by about $21,000 from operations. And so there's a net difference of about $5,800 from what was requested in Road and Bridge. We don't anticipate there being any issues with Road and Bridge on that. When we look at the assessor, the assessment fund, we have about $105,000 in differences in personnel. That reflects 2 new positions and an increase in 1 position. And then under operations, there's about $100,000 there. And that's a compensation study, increased training, subscriptions, and postage. And there's about $120,000 not recommended at this point of 2 vehicles, laptops and computers, and a server. And so that difference adds up to about $324,000. That's not recommended at this time. Now, you'll remember earlier I said that out of the requests, only about $92,000 would get into operations. So we can easily see the commission could approve about $220,000 of these requests if, depending on the priorities that are put on them and discussions with the assessor in their office. And it, wouldn't be out of the question for us to go ahead and see a spend down in that account if we can understand a growth in revenue that could be taking place or a change in expenditures that over multiple years that we're not anticipating in the budget office. Obviously, offices and departments know their numbers better than we do. That takes us to E911, and they have about $88,000 in operations, not approved, not recommended. That's about $88,000 in training. And then in capital, there's requests of about $1,087,200 that aren't recommended at this point. We don't have any issues with the fund balance in 911. As a matter of fact, the budget office has been encouraging them to find ways to spend the fund balance that they have and make sure, it's something that benefits the citizens and citizens approve of. We felt it necessary not to recommend these amounts, not because we don't think the fund can handle them, but because we feel that a presentation should be made to commission on these requested increases. That takes us to the law enforcement sales tax fund. We've got about $1.2 million in unrecommended requests in personnel, $155,000 in operations, and $1,978,000 in capital. And we'll talk about those in more detail, breaking it down into departments after the general revenue breakdown. Federal stimulus, we're showing a $4,255,000 difference from requested, and that's really just the budget office adjusting what we feel the beginning balance of ARPA would be to spend at the requested time. We looked at the balance on books and didn't take into account the additional spending that might happen. And so we feel the $13,930,000 is a much closer amount to what would be remaining at end of year. When we look at the collector tax maintenance fund, this is a discretionary fund, so we're really kind of hands off on this. There's an increase of $12,903,000 in personnel spending, and that was at the collector's request that we add that in. And then that takes us to the sheriff's federal grants total, and that's $32,237 more in personnel, or less approved in personnel, and that's related to the overall personnel restructuring request that the sheriff's asked for. So out of all of our funds, we've got these 8 funds that have differences, and a couple of these, at least 3 out of the 8, are probably funds that don't need to have any discussion. Did we? So to go into more detail in general revenue, so offices and department heads can see what the budget department's recommendations have done to their requests. When we look at the 31st Circuit Court order, we had done about $131 of adjustments due to personnel costs. And then we were contacted by Juvenile and asked to take out $500 of operations that they had requested. So the net difference there is just $368. Typically, you'd see that being zero, but we wanted to increase personnel just to be more accurate. And then we had that request from juvenile. When we look at the prosecuting attorney, we see the commission decisions total $512,000 in personnel. However, vacancy is $453,000 of that. So really, when you look at the prosecuting attorney's office, their personnel requests amount to about $58,000 in position improvements. And then they have about $78,000 of operations not recommended. The PA is about $25,000 of that. Title 4D is another $10,000 of that, and then the FJC is about $30,000 of that total. And when we look at capital, the PA and Title 4D represent that $14,000. That takes us to the sheriff's office. And again, the sheriff's office, we see personnel requests, the difference being $5,423,000. However, $1,340,000 of that is vacancy. So that net difference is $4,403,000. And when you look at that, $4,403,000 of that is position requests changes. And then there's actually 12 new positions being requested related to campus security for a total of about $863,000. So that total is really about $5,266,000 compared to that $6,004,000, or that $5,423,000. When we look at operations, there's about $148,000 in range supplies that are being requested. This is a new category. And then we have about $18,000 in GPS tracking price increases that are requested. So that makes the sheriff's net total of about $4,262,000 that are commission decisions. When we look at the auditor's office, they've requested a new person and equipment for that new position if it's filled. And that's the $59,570 there. The collector of revenue, due to personnel changes, the $6,300 is really taken care of by decreases in insurance, elections. And so it's not a change in personnel. Well, there is a requested increase on a portion of one person's salary in this. And then operations, the $64,500 on operations there. We have right line at $10,000 in mailing expenses and about $55,000 in senior tax freeze expenditures requested. And the senior tax freeze expenditures is a new budget item this year. It wasn't in last year's budget. However, it was added mid-year and they've been taking expenses into that. And the request does not seem out of line, but since it's a new to the budget, we wanted to make sure commission had the chance to look at that and approve it. That takes us to the county clerk's office. And of course, we have a general election going on this next year. And that's why you'll see operations going from about 114,000 up to 623 in the recommended. But there is about $12,000 in promotions. And then we have election costs of about $107,000 out of this 125. Clerk requests in operations about $17,000 and RKF requests of about $1,000. And then we have $6,000 in capital requests for commission to review. When we get to the public administrator's office, they've requested 2 new deputies. And then their 1,500 is communications and training increases. And the 4,000 is related to computers and desks for the lead positions. The recorder's office, there are no differences from budget. As you can see, they take care of all of their operations and capital out of their discretionary funds. The treasurer, no changes in personnel and operations, and there's a request for a check printer that I believe there was one last year also, and he limped by this year with that. And so that's $1,600 is there for commission to look at. That takes us to commission. And when you look at commission, we've got about $570,000 in personnel requests, $2.7 million in operations, and $3 million in capital requests. They're currently not recommended. And that totals $6,351,000. So while the commission departments did not have the largest increase in requests, they are the largest decrease in recommended balances at this point. So overall, instead of the $13,425,000, we're looking at commission decisions of about $11,161,000. So to look at those commission departments, with commission, we have about $13,300 in increased legal and training. With the PIO's office, we have about $3,500 in social media ads and supplies. Budget office, about $500 in replacing a copier with a printer. In human resources, we have changes in insurance and then drug testing, being part of that $2,000 in commission decisions for personnel. And then out of the $12,360, we have increases in legal, a compensation study, recruitment expenses, and office supplies. For purchasing, they have $4,036 requested for a software package for bidding for commission to look at and decide on. And then that takes us to general services. They got $3,256 related to an increase in a position, and then $22,403 related to a new printer, a laminator, and an image scanning system. That takes us to pretrial. Their request is really $50,000 for an increase in wraparound services. The wraparound services has been something that we've noted in the past as something that keeps people out of jail and typically saves the county money and funding. Yeah, we just changed. Okay. So that takes us to our last page on commission departments. With the medical examiner, we have about $27,000 that is for 3 promotions and more part-time hours. And then we have the $14,350 is for an increase in insurance, an increase in cremation services, and then NAME certification and supplies. That takes us to the $2,750, and that's for a card reader for the door. For information systems, this is a very large difference, mainly because they need to just explain what it is they're asking for to commission so the commission can understand and budget can understand. But right now, they've got about $332,000 in personnel requests for 5 new positions. And then out of the $806,000, we're looking at about $19,000 in increase in training, $730,000, $32,000 in maintenance, and $75,000 in phone maintenance. In capital, we've got about $2,180,000 in equipment and $118,000 in expansion of the phone system. So that takes up the differences in information systems. When we look at the Office of Emergency Management, there's $25,975, and $10,000 of that is maintenance, $6,000 supplies, $7,000 is training. And out of the $110,470, we've got $60,000 for a vehicle, $30,000 for workstations, and $20,000 combined for a message sign, kitchen cabinets, and a handicap door. When we look at the county administrator, we have about $1,500 related to training that's new. And for building operations, we've got a net $121,000 related to 4 new positions and 5 promotions. And then we have projects of about $267,000 for the historic courthouse, $104,000 for the sheriff's complex, $240,000 for archives, and $120,000 for a chair rail replacement for judicial courts, and $206,000 for the PSC for crack units, which make of that what you will. And then we have $33,000 in multiple capital requests. Now, this is when we talk about this and we talk about all these special projects for commission to look at and approve, it's probably a good time to mention that budget has not sat down with resource management and talked about the overall campus planning efforts and where we sit with that budget. We know we have bond money towards that. We have some ARPA funds and we have some ARPA interest. We have not made a determination at this point in time if we have any excess ARPA interest. And if so, then that ARPA interest might be something that could be used for some of these one-time expenses, whether it be vehicles or capital or special projects. But that's another possible source that has not been examined yet. It would require us sitting down and working through things with Kevin and Rob. Speaking of Kevin and Rob, we've got one new position request and one promotion. And then there's about $465,000 related to stormwater projects sitting there as their commission decision items. For vehicles, we have about $155,000 related to an increase in vehicle incidents for the sheriff's office, and $112,600 for vehicles, one for building ops and one for juvenile. And that's in Fund 101. Under the health department, we have $447,000 not recommended. 200,000 of that is a request for an increase in their base, which their base is currently $1 million and has been for a while. And then the other $247,000 is a request for funding towards a community mental health research project. And then that takes us to just general county operations. We have $14,000 there. 1,000 of that is workers' comp, and then 14,000 is related to tuition reimbursement. And then the 250,000 that you see there is primarily a reduction in the mental health fund for the Burrell Drop-In Center, going from 250,000 last year to 0 this year. And that's the changes in commission departments, the 6,351,000 that you see under the commission total. Mike, are we off the? Okay. Turn this off and back on. It hasn't been used in a while. Okay. So that takes us to the law enforcement sales tax decision items. We look at the 31st Circuit Court and we don't have any items listed there. Under the prosecuting attorney, we have about $75,000 in salary restructure, or I mean $7,000, the 130 minus the 123. We have $31,000 related to Carpel, Foxit Pro, and Microsoft G3 increased requests. And then capital, we have laptops and devices making up that $27,390. For the sheriff's office, personnel, we have $997,000 that's related to the wage proposals. And then under operations, we have about $84,000 in jail food, $32,000 in jail supplies, and $3,000 in maintenance. And under capital, we have about $94,000 in requests from the sheriff's department and $77,000 related to the jail under the sheriff's department, sheriff's office. That takes us to commission. And under commission, we have $199 in adjustments related to pretrial. And then under operations, we have about $5,340 related to vehicle ops. And then we have $1,779,000, where $2,000 of that is capital requests by pretrial. And then $1,776,000 of that is 30 sheriff vehicle requests. And that makes the total of 162 in law enforcement sales tax. So where does that take us? What's next? So today was the statutory delivering of the recommended budget to commission. And next, we have our hearings and department meetings. So these will be the opportunities for our office holders and department heads to say, what the hell was budget thinking? You guys need to fix this. And of course, the budget office is still open to taking any kind of year-end 2025 estimates that you guys might want to put together for your offices or departments, and we can make those changes and fix our beginning estimated cash for 2026, which could help us. Obviously, not all estimates are going to be savings, but we're hopeful. But we have hearings and department meetings already on the books for Monday and Tuesday of next week. Monday is from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and Tuesday is from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. We'll be taking a break during those times for a quick lunch. I'm assuming I don't miss a lot of meals. And then after we have those hearings and departmental meetings, then commission will set a date and time for when they're going to make their decision meetings. And we have to have all this resolved by December 26th so that the budget office can finish the budget book and make it available for review to the public. And then on January 10th, that's the deadline to have a final public hearing on the budget and the adoption. So if we can do it sooner, we will, but I doubt we can do it sooner. But for the hearings and department meetings, we ask that everybody contact by email. Would be easier for Megan and Aubrey to schedule a meeting with commission. That way they have it documented to where they know what's requested and they can make sure they don't miss getting it put on the schedule. Obviously, they're going to have to communicate with you what times are available. But if you'd like to schedule a departmental meeting with commission, please reach out to them and tell them what day you would prefer, and they can give you times that are available for you to select one. And that's really what we have for our presentation today. I took it a little slower because I wanted to try and explain our cash position a little better than we have in the past, and hopefully that's
good.
sunk into everybody.
Yep, very helpful.
We can try and field any questions that you may have. And I attempt to say try because it's a lot of information to cover. But we're here if you need us.
Sure. Do we have any? Or if anyone else has a question, let us know.
You were asking about possible changes for 25 if we had any.
Mhm.
Does it have to be a GR fund or can it be a two?
No, any fund, especially your fund, is a fund that we really are interested into looking in and making sure we get the best recommendation and decision possible for your fund.
Response.
It's all
I was
good.
thinking that it was a GR centric type of a response that was necessary.
So we look at all funds. Typically, it's GR and LEST that gets the most attention because they need the most attention. But we're definitely interested in what you feel your ending balances will be for 2025. We're very open to it from everybody. Even Road and Bridge that has all the money in the world. That might be an exaggeration.
So Jeff, just quickly, how much did we budget going into 25 as an increase in general sales tax revenues percentage wise, and what were we projecting to actually finish?
We put together that budgeted figure in probably October of 2024.
Mhm.
At that time, we had looking at all the economic indicators, there was a very robust feel for how the economy was going to do in 2025, along with when we looked at the slope of our charts and what that chart would mean.
Right.
And so we ended up budgeting higher than usual, 5%.
Mhm.
And it looks like, we're growing more than what it was last year. We're not making 5%. We're going to make close to 3%.
Okay.
And next year, unfortunately, which we would be open to making changes if the outlook for the economy changes. Obviously, there's things happening every day. But right now, we've estimated where we'll end in 25, and that's our budgeted numbers for 26.
Okay.
So
I see wisdom in that.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of guesswork that goes into budgeting because, we don't, in a definitive way, know what our ending 2024 numbers are yet because we haven't had that final audit. We know we're close with what's in
Right.
Eaton, in posted and unposted, and we're fairly confident working with that. But then, you know, when we look at 2025 and projecting where we end, we have to look at September 30th as our cutoff because it just takes time to post
Sure.
October and November. And so there's one whole quarter that's just being estimated by the budget office and given some additional input from office holders and department heads on where they're going to end. And so it is, you know, a budget is just that. It's an estimate, it's a plan, and hopefully we stick close to that. We try and build in protections for our cash balance when we do this.
Right.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and, you know, appreciate all the hard work that's gone into it and taking the time to explain the beginning cash. And on that matter with the 26 outlook, some of the things I indicated to you before that I've seen and read give me pause for what the year will look like. And if we get halfway through the year and we see things are much better than, you know, what the pundits have opined out there, we can always make adjustments. But we run so close, and especially this coming year, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I know everybody would.
And that, speaking exactly to that point, that is an option that we can take with this budget. We
Mhm.
did it a little bit last year, but once you approve the things that have to be approved, there's a possibility that you would set aside some extra funds in contingency or emergency funds, and things that you don't approve. It's possible that maybe we look at those as if a system fails or if something happens to where a special project is absolutely needed, we can treat it as an emergency. And commission can look at funding that out of extra funds that are put in the contingency or the emergency funds. Obviously, when we look at our balances, that normal 3%, we usually look at that as not being spent. We don't plan on that being spent, but extra funds we put in there beyond the 3%, we could treat as we expect it to be spent. It's just commission would need to have the request and then look at how we're doing through the year at that point, and it would give you the freedom and flexibility to take care of some of these things that were requests that we put off that have become emergencies.
Mhm.
So
Very
hopefully
good.
we build some flexibility in the budget that way.
I hope so. Anybody else have any other questions? Just a reminder, Megan or Aubrey will schedule. I would ask everyone, and I know we're in this process with the departments, just to look at your projections. And since it is going to look like a pretty close year, just verify that either your the projected amount in the budget for your year-end balance is correct, or if you can just modify those and get back with Jeff. And then once you've done that, reach out to Megan or Aubrey. They might even ask if you've done that, because $334,000, that's a 0.5% pay raise, COLA. So appreciate everybody taking time with the detail. Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't have anything else.
No, just grateful for everyone for the collaborative effort and looking forward to the process.
As we did mention in the email to people, the files related to this presentation are on the budget page, and that includes the detail lines. And in those detail lines, we do have what budget projected as the ending 2025 balances for each line. So you can pull that up and review your lines easily and just see if there's a difference, more so from what was projected by our formulas and our input than what you see that amount. So it should make it easier for you to look and see if there's a difference worth noting. And it's very easy for some of these formulas to not take something into account. So your eyes on them would be important. And then for those of who couldn't attend today and wanted to, for some strange reason, see this, we'll ask Robert Jelly to put this up on the YouTube page. So you can let someone know that it will be available after this meeting.
Very good. Jeff, thank you. And thank you, Mike, for behind the curtain back there for the presentation and all the work behind it. We do appreciate it, and we look forward to a good budget season. The other thing I'll mention before we wrap up, It's not really a surprise to anyone because we budgeted for it and put it in our holiday list. But I had a question this morning about the Friday after Thanksgiving. So I'll send a reminder out that we will be closed, but you all already knew that. You may see a court order for the courts coming, but just want to remind you that we've already planned for that with county employees. So thank you all so much. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody.